It's the place I love dearest, the place I call home. Dungarvan, my hometown, I love best of all. Dear old faces and places.
When I was young, Mary, I gave a lot of my time in Colostra, my father's old home. And then one of his brothers and one sister and their father was alive. Their father, of course, was my grandfather. My grandfather, Morrissey, was a very educated man. He was Mount Melbury's sanctuary student. He lived to be the 100 years. His wife, who had been a school teacher in Kilrossenty and organist in the Kilrossenty church prior to marrying him, was Johanna Hennebury, one of the Henneburys of Portlaw, whose grandaunt was the first Mrs. Beresford, having been de pair and lived in Corrimore. She chose for a husband a soldier from Cromwell's army. Her sister chose to marry Hennebury, who was a Kilkenny large farmer. The Hennebury families were of a very educated line. Dr. Hennebury, who was my grandmother's first cousin, was the co-founder with Archbishop Sheehan of Ring College, the Irish College, which stands here off Dungarvan in the County Waterford. Patsy Morrissey, my grandfather, only came to Colostra after being evicted from Clonay Castle, which was their original home. And when they were evicted, he had an uncle who lived in Longford Court and had Colostra Farm as an out farm. From Longford Court, they crossed the canal by barge down to the Colostra Farm. They weren't living there in them days. They were living in Lady Longford's former home, which was Longford Court. Then he had a lot of sisters, and wishing to put some of them into the convents, the Mercy Convent and the Presentation, and a sister went to America, and the other sister married into the coach building family Maloney's at the Spring. All those had to be fortuned, and to do so he was obliged to sell Longford Court and come down to live in the Colostra Farm. In old days, there was a week's racing held on that farm and the surrounding farms. Later, it became the hunt race, which was only for one day. My great-grandmother, my grandfather's mother, was O'Brien of Ballintaylor. Those O'Briens were very landed people, and they had the first sawmill around here and exported their timbers through the Great War to England. Today, that farm has been sold, and the remaining boy of the O'Briens have another place away from it. The family is not extinct, owing to the fact that he's got children. It's a very old family, one of the oldest in the surrounds of this town. Also, the Morrissey family are considered the remaining old stock of the town. Dr. Hennebury had a first cousin, Dr. James Hennebury, who was parish priest in Medeliga, an outskirt of Dungarvan. A very learned man in the defining of well-got paintings. In his travels through his parish, he came across a very valuable painting in a farmer's place. They didn't know the value of it, and it was bought for big money by the Rothschilds of America. My father's brother, the eldest one, was a very beloved man, but died young owing to the fact that he was asthmatic. His funeral was a very, very large one with 4 ministers, and the abbot of Mount Millery was not coming out at that time, but he did attend his funeral. It was the last funeral to the surrounds of the town, which included going down Fair Lane, through the square, down Church Street, and around to the church. There was many cover cars in that funeral. He was a dearly beloved man, a large, tall man, very heavy. Next came John, who married into a business in this town. It was known as the Tipperary Hotel in olden days, run by Mrs. Ryan. She had quite a few daughters, this Mrs. Ryan, but Kathleen, who was my uncle's wife, was the elder member and got the business from her. My uncle increased it over the years. There was grocery business there, and he enlarged it by adding a big tilling business. They both died off, and one son of his, Lee, retained the business there. The other son, Vincent, bought a business from Thomas Flynn on the square, and he retained it in his lifetime and transferred it to his son, Vincent, after his time. Then the elder member of that family was Paddy Joe Morrissey. He was an attorney and coroner for West Waterford, who died very young of a heart attack. Vincent passed on too, as did Liam. Now there is but their families in the town, but the young generation are doing quite well.
Again. Okay. Yeah.
My mother's name was Eleanor Kiley, and in her family there was a double family there. Her father had married twice. His first wife was Mansfield, and she had Pats, John, Phil, Peter, Bridge and Kate. She died, and after some time he remarried Mary Downey of Armore. She had Eleanor, Molly, Daglan and Jim. In her household in all there was 9 children. A very caring, loving woman. I distinctly remember my grandmother at the age of 3. From the age of 3, I was born in America, and owing to my father's bad health, we had to leave the States in 1914, August 1914. So we gave 3 years under my grandmother's care until we moved into town. My grandmother's people came from the Yellow House, seen in the Strand in Armore, now occupied at this time by a German. There was a large family there who married into different families. Lindens were one family. The old Mr. Downey was able to read the old Irish writings called Ogham. There were several teachers in the family, and in the revival of Irish, I remember one of them staying at our home in Abbeyside, Sean Downey, who had many books to his credit. Also a cousin of his, Sean Dower, very learned man too. Of my mother's family, there was 3 of the boys went to America. Pats was the first that went out, the first wife's family, but he came home in ill health and died. Next went John and Phil. Their families are still in America. Then there was Mrs. Foley, who in 1922 went to America. Patsy Foley sold out his farm and crossed from Canada into the States. They were put on the island, and a senator by the name of O'Brien, he was a speaker in the House, came to their aid and befriended them, got them into the States and married one of the daughters. I lost contact with the family over the years. I still know that there is a boy in Canada, but there was another sister there whom I can't account for. But her name was Nellie. And I'm told that one of John Kiley's sons visits Ireland every 2 years. I haven't met him, but my first cousins have. He's called on their home. He's an attorney. In my mother's young days, they had a maiden aunt who was a very, very educated woman. She was educated in France. She also had a brother who was parish priest in the old parish for a number of years, and a very noted horseman. My grandfather Kylie, in olden days, his farm was under the Lord Dungavan's estate. And he got a bad year in which a lot of his stock perished, and he wasn't able to pay the overheads to the landlord through the agent. The agent at that time was Haley Hutchinson, and he was known to take backhands from other farmers who wished to acquire land. So he was in the pints of being evicted. And he got the word that Lord Dunamore was having a banquet with some English lords who had come over to visit him. So he made up his mind, he was a great horseman, that his prize horse, he would go to Dunamore, and do some tricks with his horse and give some loud cheers for Lord Dunamore. So his horse, he jumped his horse from one high pier to the other, and the horse would stand up on its hind feet and do some tricks like that. But when he gave those cheers, the lords came out to know who was there. So he told them he was one of his tenants who was a broken man, and that all he had left was his horse, which he wished to tender on behalf of his yearly rent. But the lords thought he was such a great horseman, and the horse was such a pretty one, that the rider was worthy of his horse. He went into the banquet with them, and Lord Dunamore said, "Kylie," he said, "I will restock your farm for you. You're a very noble man," he said, "and there will always be a Kylie there." Well, that must have been well over maybe 150 years ago. But the Kylie name is still in that place. It's still there. My first cousin's living there. And it's a very beautiful old home. And my Uncle Peter's son has built a beautiful mansion on the entrance. It was called Ballytresnag. And in olden days, with the works of a farm place, a lot of great pots used to be boiled on the great big fireplace. There's draw water from the well, but they didn't know that it was a very blessed well until one day my grandmother, the boys had brought her in some water, and she was putting on potatoes to boil. She put the water in on the potatoes over the fire, and she had fir bushes which give a great blaze under the pot. And she thought she was there for an hour, and she was wondering why the pot wasn't boiling. So she went over and she put it in her hand, and it was as cold as when they brought it into the well. So she was quite annoyed with it. And she sent one of the boys for the parish priest to find out what had happened. So he said he would look into the history of the parish, owing to the fact that such a thing had occurred. He looked into the history of the parish, and he found that the well had sprung up in the ruins of St. Isna's church. So he told her in future to be very careful not to bring in the little blessed fish which they found in the pot when they emptied out the potatoes and water. It had to be put back into the well. That family was known as the Poets and Scholars. I didn't get this history, only that I was visiting the hospital one day and a very old man was looking at me and asked me my name and my origin. I told him who my mother had been, who my father had been, and he said to me, he said, you belong to the Poets and Scholars. A lot of those were poets, he said, very, very educated people. That same man had a brother, a parish priest, and he lived to be nearly 100 years. And occasionally when I'd go downtown, I would meet this parish priest. He could never recall my name, but he'd always turn around. I know who you are, I know who you are. But the name wouldn't come, and he'd say, I know it's the Poets and Scholars. The generations go back in the Kylie line to some Spanish sailors who settled in the old parish, 5 brothers of them. I can't say whether it's the Spanish invasion or whether it was ordinary sailors, but it was peculiar that 5 of them should be on the one ship and come and settle in the old parish. There's quite a number of the families around still. And all those Kylies are noted for their dark skin, their black hair and brown eyes. Lots of freckles. To just tell you, about 50 years ago, there was a man arrived on my door and he said, girl, would you know me? I took a good look at him and I said, wherever you came from, I said, you're definitely Kylie. Why do you say that? He said. The reason is simple. I said, because of your skin, because of your appearance, because of your black hair and brown eyes. Also, I said, you have a high-bridged nose, I said, like my elder sister. There's a monument to my mother's uncle in the old parish church where he was parish priest. Family is a very long-line one, as is my father's family. Widely connected. My father's family, between the Welches of Comra, the Fitzgeralds of Comra, and the Keatings of Comra. My mother's family, there is many branches of the Mansfield family as there is of the Downey family. Very widely connected. So much so, in my young days, I heard an old lady tracing both sides. And she said, when the tally is over, she said, you'll find, she said, you and your husband, to my mother, are both related as distant cousins. But my mother remembered then that when she did get married and when she wrote to her father from America, he said, you know, Patrick Morrissey, he said, would be a relative of yours.
Pen.
Some old ladies who lived in this town told me employment was very scarce in olden days in the town. And those poor people were obliged to walk the 2 miles to Colostra. They had a cider orchard there and a plant for making cider, which employed a lot of the ladies of the town. It was a big business then, for there wasn't establishments of the kind in this town. Those people were very grateful that they were employed there. In them days, things were hard to come by. A living of any kind was scarce.
In my heart I keep wishing someday I will be back again in the